So it's that time of year again. The time in the NBA season where a bunch of teams scramble at the last moment to try to make some trades and hope to either A, improve their current situation, or B, correct some mistakes that they've made in the months leading up to this year's trading deadline. And as I normally do, here's my video not only wrapping up and giving you details of some of the major transactions during this year's trading deadline, but also giving my opinions on who are the biggest winners and losers and even grading some of these transactions. But without further ado, let's get right in the video. Here are the biggest winners and losers in this year's trading deadline. First, let's start off positive, get straight to it, and talk about the trade that I know everybody wants me to touch upon, and that's the Simmons and Hardin transaction. The Philadelphia 76ers received James Hardin and Paul Millsap, while the Brooklyn Nets will receive Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, this year's first-round pick that is unprotected, and a protected 2027 first rounder. Now, I know many people want to hear a hot take about this transaction, but quite frankly, I'm fairly neutral. I believe that this is one of the rare times that a team trades a top 10 player in the NBA and they still came out as winners. Now, I'm not going to give you my full thoughts on this transaction because the video will be way too long. However, I do plan to make my own separate video for it, but the abridged version is very simple. The Sixers in this transaction, though lost some depth and some draft assets, essentially traded away a player that they were receiving nothing for throughout the entire year, as Simmons' refusal to play for the organization had lasted all the way up to this year's deadline. And in return for that and some valuable depth, Philly just ended up with a top 10 player when healthy in James Hardin, who not only fulfills the void in talent that the Sixers have been desperately needing for most of Embiid's tenure with the organization, but also provides a level of shot creation at all three levels at an elite standard that certainly was missing from this organization and has quite frankly held this team back from achieving a conference finals appearance and even further. What makes this transaction even better for Philadelphia is that they didn't have to give up Matisse Thybulle nor Tyrese Maxey. So because of those factors, as well as it being fairly self-explanatory, the Philadelphia 76ers are not only winners, but I do give them an A. On the other hand, we have the Brooklyn Nets, which may be a little bit more difficult to explain, but I'll try my best. The Nets are a team that has a roster that on paper looks amazing, but looking at it practically, it clearly isn't working out. As I record this video, the Nets not only find themselves with the 8th seed, but also they are in the middle of a 10-game losing streak. Now, this outcome is a result of several different factors, but the two that I want to pinpoint is A, the front office in Brooklyn made a lot of changes over the past couple of years, and in doing so, made an extreme commitment to an offensive-oriented team. Because of these decisions, even though on paper they were very talented, the roster was very shallow and lacked a lot of defensive presence. So when the injuries started to pile up and you had players like Bembry receiving north of 25 minutes on a game-to-game basis, the Nets being in a 10-game losing streak honestly isn't that surprising. And oh yeah, I just had to point this out as well. Kyrie not being vaccinated, which made him ineligible to play home games, also probably played a major factor to what just occurred with the Nets. Because of these factors, losing wasn't the only thing that was occurring out in Brooklyn. James Harden wanted out as well, and with him being on the last guaranteed year on his contract, the Nets really didn't have that many options. And honestly, I don't think the Nets could have done better than what they received for a top 10 player in the league. Because sure, they definitely take a hit in terms of talent, but in terms of what this team actually needed, they received it. A, they got depth. They essentially traded one player for three, and Seth Curry is an upgraded version of Joe Harris, and Drummond will provide an interior presence for a team that is trying to make a postseason run that more than likely will include them matching up against Joel Embiid and or Giannis Antetokounmpo. They also received draft compensation. This is great for an organization that gave up a lot of draft picks to receive James Harden in the first place, so receiving some draft picks works heavily in their favor, and it gives them some flexibility moving forward. And then in terms of the elephant in the room, which has been Simmons, I know many people aren't high on him, but he does answer a lot of the questions that many people had about this team even when Hardin was on the roster. He's young and hasn't had a consistent problem with injuries throughout his career. Due to his size, he's very versatile, and if there's one thing that we all know that Simmons provides to any team at an elite level, that is defense, something that the Nets desperately needed. Now, of course, I know many people are going to point out the same problems that Simmons had out in Philly. Won't they so carry over in Brooklyn? And that is fair. I don't expect Simmons to start shooting threes now. However, I do believe that this is a team that is more conducive to his playing style. And because of that, I give the Brooklyn Nets an A to an A-. Up next, we have the Domantas Sabonis Tyrese Halliburton transaction, where the Sacramento Kings yet again prove that they are the worst ran franchise in the NBA. where Indiana received Tyrese Haliburton, Buddy Hield, Tristan Thompson, and the Sacramento Kings received Domantas Sabonis, Justin Holiday, Jeremy Lamb, and a future second rounder. First, we're going to start off positive. Indiana is an organization that really lacked a sense of direction. Ever since they traded Paul George, and Oladipo never really took off due to injuries, at best this was a team that was maxing out as a first-round exit. Because of this, hitting the restart button and trading away a bunch of miscellaneous pieces was a no-brainer, but things drastically changed with this transaction. Now, Tristan Thompson is Tristan Thompson, and Buddy Hield, even though many people are mixed on his production, still is a quality three-point shooter in the NBA. But when it comes to Tyrese, you may not necessarily know what you're going to get out of him, but that honestly is a good thing. The ceiling for the 21-year-old guard is endless. He's a 6'5" shot-creating guard who can play defense and is efficient at scoring the basketball. Out of the 93 players who have tried at least 300 jumpers so far this season, Haliburton ranks 6th in efficiency with an effective field goal percentage of 58.7. Out of the 49 players who've attempted at least 100 off-the-dribble three-pointers, Haliburton ranks 2nd in efficiency, shooting 40.6% from deep. He's also converting 42.6% of his catch-and-shoot three-pointers. He ranks 11th in assists, 12th in steals, and he's only 21 years old. And I believe the biggest reason why so many people are optimistic about what Tyrese can do in Indiana is because within the 12 games that he played without De'Aaron Fox, he averaged 19 points and 10 assists on very respectable shooting splits. So yeah, he's that good. Matter of fact, the perceived value for Haliburton is so high that other franchises across the league didn't even think to call Sacramento to try to acquire him because they just assumed that he was untouchable. So the fact that the Pacers were able to receive a lot of potential in a young asset without having to roll the dice in the lottery makes this a massive win for them, and I give them an A+. Now, on the other hand, we have the Sacramento Kings, and honestly, this has the potential of being the worst trade in the last decade. Now, yes, it is true, on the surface, the Sacramento Kings did receive the best player in the transaction. Now, I would argue the gap between Sabonis and Haliburton isn't that wide, and after a year in marginal improvement, I would definitely believe that Tyrese Haliburton will be better than Sabonis very soon. But as of right now, it's true, Domantas Sabonis is a better player, and he does put them in a situation where they have a better chance of competing for a playoff spot. But see, that's the problem. In terms of Domantas Sabonis, we already know what his ceiling is, and it's maxing out at an all-star level, and if he is the best player on your team, at best we are talking about a fringe playoff unit that will be knocked out in the first round, which is something that I don't believe any team should be striving for. Because ironically, the Kings will just end up like the Indiana Pacers, where they'll be lacking a sense of direction and maxing out with first round exits, and inevitably will be forced to hit the restart button. I'm of the belief there's no need to prolong that process, especially when you have a young prospect like Haliburton on your roster that has the potential to perform at an all-star and, dare I say, all-NBA caliber level. So because of all of that, the Sacramento Kings have to get an F-. Up next, we have the Portland Trailblazers, who saw a lot of change in their roster as they interacted in 2 transactions. The first one was the Clippers, as they sent over Norman Powell and Robert Covington. I love this transaction for the Clippers, as they not only add some depth to their guard play with a quality performer in Norman Powell, but they also add a little bit more versatility on the perimeter in Robert Covington. And on top of that, the Clippers didn't have to give up much of anything in return. Massive win for them, and I give them an A. The other team that Portland traded with during this trading deadline were the New Orleans Pelicans, as they sent over CJ McCollum, Larry Nance Jr., and Tony Snell. And again, I love this trade for the opposing team. The Pelicans picked up exactly what they wanted, and a veteran guard who has some scoring versatility while also being a quality floor spacer and three-point shooter, which would be a great complementary piece to put alongside Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson. The only problem that I have with this transaction is how much money CJ is getting paid, which I know will be a problem for the Pelicans since they were attempting to avoid overpaying players during the offseason, hence the reason why they just allowed Lonzo Ball to walk in free agency. Nevertheless though, New Orleans got exactly what they wanted without giving much up of anything, which is why I give them an A-. Now you would believe after moving CJ, Rocco, and Norman Powell that the Portland Trailblazers got something in return that is valuable, and no, they didn't. Some of the highlights in these return packages for Portland is Eric Bledsoe, Justice Winslow, Keon Johnson, Josh Hart, and some draft picks that are protected, which is by far some of the worst returns I have ever seen any team receive for players of the caliber of CJ McCollum and Norman Powell. But if that is a perceived value across the league for a player of CJ, then it is what it is. Gather up all your draft picks and finally hit the restart button, something that many people have been begging this franchise to do for several years now. And if that was a direction that they were moving into, honestly, I would have given the Portland Trailblazers a C. Still losers in my eyes just because of the lack of return that they got for quality players, but a C. However, that's not what they're doing. According to Woj, Portland's plan is to fully reshape the roster around Damian Lillard. Portland has created a $21 million trade exception and potentially $60 million in salary cap space in this upcoming offseason. Multiple draft picks and assets from the Pelicans and Clippers trades, which then leads them to have a plan to pursue a high-end talent now rather than retreat and rebuild.
That's stupid, guys. Is this camera on me?
Yes, it's on.
That's stupid. Use your common sense.
The idea that a high-end talented player would just voluntarily play for a small market team like Portland, even if they were going to be paired with Damian Lillard, is so far-fetched that I honestly believe that this is a lie, and I'm just of the belief that Portland is trying to just retain as much leverage as they possibly can when they inevitably trade Damian Lillard. But hey, since that's what they're telling us, that's what I have to go by, which is why they're not only losers, but I also give them an F. And finally, the last noteworthy trade that transpired were the Dallas Mavericks sending over Kristaps Porzingis and a second-round pick to the Washington Wizards, and in return, they received, get this, Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans, which is mind-blowing and questionable to say the least. Now first, we have the Washington Wizards, who I understand why they traded for Porzingis. Granted, there are a lot of red flags, with Porzingis, but I believe the potential rewards will outweigh the risk, especially because the only things that they gave up were two role players that weren't even fulfilling their roles on the team. And because of that, I give the Wizards a B. Now, on the other hand, with the Dallas Mavericks, man, this is so questionable by so many metrics. And I say that not because they traded KP. The amount of money that he's making, as well as his injury history, makes all the sense in the world that they should have moved on without him. But the reason why this is such a head scratcher is because what they received in return. A returning trade package of Dinwiddie and Bertans is so insignificant that I just would have stayed packing, hope for the best for Porzingis and Luka moving forward. Because if you're unaware, Spencer Dinwiddie is arguably the worst starting point guard in the NBA, and Bertans is no longer a consistent three-point shooter. Now, you can easily make an argument that if he's on a team with Luka Doncic, that he'll get better looks because Luka is way better at morphing defenses than anybody out in Washington, and that is fair, but it's really the only bright spot that I see in this transaction, because even if that were to happen, the amount of money that he's getting paid on a year-to-year basis still makes him an overpaid role player. And because of that, even if I were to be optimistic, the best thing that I can give Dallas is a C-. And finally, we have the teams that didn't do anything at all this trading deadline. Now, some of them, it's hard to be critical. Teams like the Miami Heat and the Golden State Warriors find themselves at the top of their respective conferences. And honestly, outside of the Warriors not finding a quality option to play at the 5, which they're definitely going to need in the inevitable matchup against the Phoenix Suns in the playoffs, I personally don't have that much to say at all for two teams that have been really good so far this season. Now, on the other hand, if you are a franchise that has been a massive disappointment this season and you still didn't do anything at all this trading deadline, well, I have no other choice but to look at you as losers. And that franchise I'm referring to are the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, I'm not someone that believed in the Russell Westbrook being traded for really anyone. The odds that they were going to be able to pull that off was very slim, and I don't believe the returns that the Lakers would have done much of anything anyway. However, what I do find very interesting is during a trade deadline where teams like the Pacers and Blazers are practically giving away quality role players to any team that is willing to give them cap flexibility, a first rounder, and or some young assets, the Lakers still could not land anything during the deadline. Furthermore, even if I were a bit more forgiving and understanding and came to the conclusion that possibly THT, Austin Reeves, Kendrick Nunn just didn't have that much value in the open market and nobody was really interested in a 2027 first rounder, I still would come to the conclusion that the Lakers are losers during this trade deadline because they put themselves in a situation where they didn't have any asset flexibility, no draft picks, no quality young players, and majority of the contracts that they have on their team are just 1-year rentals. And P.S. This is yet again another concern that many people like myself attempted to highlight during the offseason when the Lakers traded for Russell Westbrook. Because the level of commitment that any team would have to take when trading for Westbrook goes beyond what happens on the floor. You no longer have any flexibility in terms of what you can or cannot do for your cap space. So yeah, I still give the Lakers a big fat F. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. What are your grades for some of these transactions that just happened during the NBA trade deadline? Also, if you want my thoughts on some of the other transactions, because a lot of things occurred, you can go to my second channel, or you can even watch me on Twitch, where I was live streaming the trading deadline and other big moments that happens throughout the NBA season. So if I'm not uploading here, more than likely I'm just on a different platform. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.